Colorado Springs, 1885. The town's dusty main street vibrated with the unlikely sound of a violin being tuned as the spring sun cast long shadows across the storefronts. Quinn Galloway lowered his bow and squinted at the handwritten sheet music balanced precariously on a barrel, his brow furrowed in concentration. "That's not right," he muttered, adjusting his fingers on the fingerboard. At 24, Quinn was every inch the cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days in the saddle. His chestnut hair fell in waves over his forehead, occasionally requiring him to toss it back with a quick motion of his head. Unlike many of the men he rode with, he kept himself clean-shaven, which made him look even younger than his years. He tried the passage again, the sweet notes hanging in the evening air. Quinn had grown up with a violin in his hands before he ever held a lasso, but few in Colorado Springs knew of his musical talent. As foreman of the Double R Ranch, his days were spent on horseback, directing cattle drives, and managing ranch hands, not practicing Bach and Beethoven. The sound of approaching footsteps made him lower the instrument quickly, but not before Zara Grayson had rounded the corner of the general store, stopping abruptly at the sight of him. "Mr. Galloway?" Her voice held surprise, and perhaps a hint of amusement. "I didn't know you played." Quinn felt heat rise to his cheeks. Zara Grayson was the new schoolteacher who had arrived from Boston just 3 months ago. At 22, she had already established herself as a force in the town, with her progressive ideas about education and women's suffrage. Her honey blonde hair was always neatly pinned beneath modest hats, though wayward curls often escaped, framing her heart-shaped face. Today, she wore a simple blue calico dress, practical yet becoming. "Miss Grayson," he nodded, resisting the urge to hide the violin behind his back. "Just remembering an old hobby." "An old hobby?" She stepped closer, her eyes bright with interest. "That sounded like Vivaldi. Summer from the Four Seasons, if I'm not mistaken." Quinn blinked in surprise. "You know Vivaldi?" "I studied piano at the conservatory before coming west to teach," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Though I haven't played much since arriving. There's not exactly an abundance of pianos in Colorado Springs." The realization that they shared this connection, this piece of a world that seemed so distant from the rugged frontier, created an instant bond between them. Quinn found himself telling her about his childhood in Philadelphia, where his mother had insisted on classical music lessons before the family headed west after the war. "I haven't played properly in years," he admitted. "But lately I've been thinking." "Thinking what?" she prompted when he hesitated. Quinn glanced around the empty street, then met her eyes. "That this town needs more than just saloons and church socials. Music brings something different, something necessary. Like civilization," Zara suggested, her voice soft but intense. "Like beauty," Quinn corrected. "And there's plenty of beauty out here already, just of a different kind than back east." The conversation might have continued, but the town's telegraph operator, Emmett Turner, came hurrying down the street waving a yellow paper. "Quinn, message from the ranch. Got a situation with the North herd." Quinn nodded to Zara regretfully. "Duty calls, Miss Grayson." As he carefully placed his violin in its case, Zara touched his arm lightly. "Mr. Galloway, if you're serious about bringing music to Colorado Springs, I'd be interested in helping." He tipped his hat, a smile crossing his face. "I might just take you up on that, Miss Grayson." What Quinn couldn't know as he mounted his horse and rode toward the Double R was how this chance encounter would change not only his life, but the entire cultural landscape of the American frontier, or that the woman watching him ride away would become the cornerstone of those changes. The cattle situation required Quinn's full attention for nearly a week. A broken fence had allowed 100 head to wander dangerously close to Comanche territory, and rounding them up without incident took patience and skill. By the time he returned to town, he nearly convinced himself that the conversation with Zara Grayson had been a flight of fancy, until he found a note waiting for him at the general store. "Mr. Galloway, if your musical interests still hold, please call at the schoolhouse Saturday afternoon after classes. I've made some inquiries you might find interesting. Regards, Z." Grayson, the formal tone, couldn't disguise what seemed to Quinn a barely contained excitement. He found himself equally curious and refolded the note carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket. Saturday found him at the one-room schoolhouse, just as the last students were filing out. He waited until they had dispersed before knocking on the door frame. Zara looked up from her desk, where she appeared to be grading papers, her face brightening when she saw him. "You came," she said, standing quickly and smoothing her skirt, a rich burgundy today that complemented her fair complexion. "Your note intrigued me," Quinn admitted, removing his hat as he stepped inside. The schoolroom was tidy but lived in, with children's drawings pinned alongside maps of the United States and Europe. "I've been asking around town," Zara said, gesturing for him to take a seat at one of the children's desks. He did so awkwardly, his long legs barely fitting in the space. "It seems you're not the only person in Colorado Springs with musical training." She proceeded to unfold a list of names she'd compiled. Dr. Matthews, the town physician, had played clarinet in his university days. Mrs. Holloway, the mayor's wife, was an accomplished cellist before marriage. Young Thomas at the bank had played trumpet in the war, and several others with varying degrees of musical experience. "I had no idea," Quinn said, genuinely surprised. "People bring their pasts with them when they come west," Zara replied. "They just don't always have the opportunity to share those parts of themselves." "And what about you, Miss Grayson? You mentioned studying piano." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, I was to perform with the Boston Philharmonic before." She stopped abruptly. "Before circumstances changed my path." Quinn sensed a story there, something painful, but knew better than to press. Instead, he gestured to her list. "So what are you suggesting? That we form some kind of musical group?" "Not just any musical group," Zara said, leaning forward with infectious enthusiasm. "A proper orchestra. The first symphony orchestra in the Western Territories." Quinn laughed, then realized she was serious. "Miss Grayson, that's ambitious." "Is it any more ambitious than taming wild horses or driving cattle across hundreds of miles of dangerous terrain?" she challenged. "The West was built on ambition, Mr. Galloway." He studied her for a long moment. There was something compelling about her vision and about her. The usual careful distance he maintained from the unmarried women in town seemed to dissolve in her presence. "We'd need music," he said finally. "Instruments. A place to practice." Zara's smile was radiant. "So you'll help?" "I think you've already decided I will," he replied, returning her smile. What began as a fanciful conversation quickly evolved into determined action. Quinn found himself riding to neighboring towns to locate sheet music and musicians, while Zara persuaded Mayor Holloway to allow them use of the town hall for practice. Word spread, and within 2 weeks, they had assembled a group of 15 tentative musicians, their instruments retrieved from trunks and attics where they had lain dormant since their owners came west. Their first rehearsal was nothing short of chaotic. Years of disuse had left many instruments in poor condition. The piano donated by the Prescott Hotel was woefully out of tune, and several players could barely remember how to read music. Dr. Matthews kept losing his place in the simple Mozart piece they attempted, while Mayor Holloway's wife produced sounds from her cello that made horses outside whinny in protest. "This is hopeless," groaned Thomas from the bank, after they had stumbled through the same passage for the 10th time. Quinn glanced at Zara, who sat at the battered piano. Her face showed disappointment, but when she caught his eye, she straightened her shoulders. "Again, from the beginning," she called out firmly. "Remember why we're doing this." As the weeks passed, their small orchestra began to coalesce into something recognizable. Quinn found himself spending every spare moment either practicing his violin or helping others with their parts. The ranch foreman's unexpected musical knowledge raised eyebrows among his men, but his reputation as a skilled horseman and fair boss prevented any serious ridicule. It was during this time that Quinn began to see Zara in a different light. Their shared project required them to work closely together, selecting music, organizing rehearsals, and solving the countless problems that arose. He found himself looking forward to their planning sessions in the schoolhouse after her teaching day ended, when she would remove the pins from her hair and let it cascade over her shoulders as they pored over music scores. "You never told me why you left Boston," he said one evening as they arranged chairs for the next rehearsal. "You were about to perform with the Philharmonic?" Zara's hands stilled on the chair she was positioning. For a moment, Quinn thought she wouldn't answer. "My father lost everything in the financial panic of '73, she finally said. "He took his own life. My mother followed within the year." Her voice was steady, but Quinn could see the tension in her shoulders. The conservatory was no longer an option. Teaching was. Quinn set down the music stand he was holding and moved closer to her. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Don't be. Coming west was my choice. A fresh start where no one knew my history or pitted me for it. And now? Do you regret it? Zara looked up at him, her eyes clear and direct. Not at this moment, no. The air between them seemed to change, charged with something neither was ready to name. Quinn was acutely aware of how improper it would appear for them to be alone in the town hall as dusk fell. His reputation might survive, but hers would not. We should finish up, he said reluctantly, stepping back. People will talk. A flash of something, disappointment, crossed her face before she nodded. Of course, propriety must be maintained. As he walked her to her boarding house that evening, keeping a respectable distance on the boardwalk, Quinn was struck by a troubling realization. He was falling in love with Zara Grayson. And for a ranch foreman with little to offer beyond a modest salary and an uncertain future, that was a complication neither of them needed, especially with the orchestra's first performance only weeks away. The news spread through Colorado Springs and beyond like wildfire. A symphony orchestra, performing Beethoven and Mozart in the same town where gunfights had occurred just years before. The Denver Post sent a reporter. Wealthy patrons from as far as Santa Fe expressed interest in attending. The date was set for June 15, 1885, the first formal classical music concert in the Colorado Territory. As the day approached, the pressure mounted. Mayor Holloway, initially supportive, began to worry about the town's reputation if the performance failed. This isn't some saloon entertainment, he warned Quinn after a particularly rough rehearsal. People of means and education will be judging our entire community by this experiment. It won't fail, Quinn assured him, with more confidence than he felt. Privately, he shared his concerns with Zara as they walked together after rehearsal, chaperoned at a discreet distance by Mrs. Holloway. We're not ready, he admitted. Half the string section still can't stay together in the third movement, and Dr. Matthews keeps rushing his clarinet solo. Zara tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. An acceptable familiarity given their regular association with the orchestra, though it still sent a jolt through Quinn whenever she did it. They'll be ready, she insisted. You've done more than anyone thought possible, Quinn. It was the first time she had used his given name, and they both noticed it. She blushed slightly, but didn't correct herself. We've done it, he corrected, placing his hand briefly over hers. This orchestra was your vision. But it needed your leadership, she replied softly. These men respect you. They follow you. Quinn was about to respond when they were interrupted by the arrival of a stagecoach, unusual for that time of evening. It pulled to a stop near the hotel, and a well-dressed man in his 50s descended, looking around with the air of someone accustomed to finer surroundings. Who was that? Quinn asked, noticing how Zara had stiffened beside him. Quentin Prescott, she said, her voice suddenly tight. Director of the Boston Conservatory. Quinn looked at her in surprise. You know him? He was my mentor, she said. What is he doing here? They soon found out. Prescott had read about the orchestra in an Eastern newspaper and had come west to see this frontier cultural phenomenon for himself and to offer guidance. His arrival threw their small musical community into both excitement and panic. Here was a true professional, someone who conducted orchestras in Boston and New York, now observing their humble efforts. Prescott attended their next rehearsal, his expression inscrutable as they struggled through Beethoven's Symphony No. 5. Afterward, he offered pointed critiques that, while delivered politely, left several members dejected. Perhaps we should consider a simpler program, he suggested. Folk tunes, perhaps. Something more appropriate to the setting. Quinn saw the flash of hurt in Zara's eyes, though she maintained her composure. We chose this music because it speaks to universal human experiences, she replied. Joy, struggle, triumph. Those aren't exclusive to Eastern cities, Mr. Prescott. The conservatory director raised his eyebrows slightly. Indeed, Miss Grayson, your idealism remains unchanged. There was history there, something personal, that made Quinn instantly wary. His suspicions were confirmed the next day when he overheard Prescott speaking to Zara outside the schoolhouse. You could return with me, you know, the older man said. The conservatory would welcome you back. Your talent is wasted here. Quinn paused out of sight, knowing he should make his presence known, but unable to move. I have responsibilities here, Zara replied. My students, the orchestra, this orchestra is a charming novelty, nothing more, Prescott said dismissively. And as for teaching frontier children their letters, surely someone else could manage that. Boston still remembers you, Zara. Your circumstances then were unfortunate, but now. There was a pause before Zara responded, her voice so quiet Quinn had to strain to hear. You offered me no help then, when I needed it most. The conservatory has certain standards to maintain, Prescott said stiffly. But now, with time having passed, there could be a place for you again. Quinn had heard enough. He rounded the corner, nodding politely to the startled pair. Miss Grayson, Mr. Prescott. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Zara said quickly, her cheeks flushed. Mr. Prescott was just leaving. The conservatory director frowned but tipped his hat. Consider my offer, Miss Grayson. It won't remain open indefinitely. As he walked away, Quinn turned to Zara. What offer? Nothing important, she said, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. Zara, he said gently. What did he mean about your circumstances? She closed her eyes briefly. After my father's suicide, there were rumors, unpleasant ones, about misappropriated funds, about his character. The conservatory found it convenient to distance themselves from his daughter. Mr. Prescott made it clear I was no longer welcome. Quinn felt a surge of anger on her behalf. And now he wants you to go back? After abandoning you. He's offering me a second chance at the life I trained for, she said, finally meeting his eyes. A life of music, of culture. Is that what you want? Quinn asked, suddenly afraid of her answer. Before she could respond, one of her students came running up, urgent about some classroom matter. Zara excused herself, leaving Quinn with the uncomfortable realization that Zara might soon have a choice to make, one that could take her far from Colorado Springs. Far from him. The day of the concert arrived with all the tension of Cattle Drive's end. The town hall had been transformed, with borrowed chairs arranged in rows and a makeshift stage constructed at one end. Programs printed by the local newspaper listed the evening's selections. Mozart's Ein kleine Nacht music, selections from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and Vivaldi's Summer from the Four Seasons, with Quinn as violin soloist. Backstage, really just a partitioned area of the town's meeting room. The musicians adjusted their formal wear, an eclectic mix of outdated Eastern fashions, and their Sunday best. Quinn wore the black suit he'd brought west years ago, now slightly too tight across the shoulders. He was helping Dr. Matthews with his bow tie when Zara appeared, and the sight of her momentarily took his breath away. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, modest but elegant, with her honey blonde hair swept up in an intricate style adorned with a single pearl comb. It struck Quinn that this was Zara as she might have been in Boston, poised, refined, a woman of culture. She belonged in this world of music and art, not just the schoolroom or the frontier town. You look, he began, but words failed him. Presentable, I hope, she said with a nervous smile. This was my mother's gown. I've been saving it. Before Quinn could respond, Mayor Holloway bustled in. Full house, he announced, sounding both nervous and proud. Every seat taken, and people standing in the back. Even the miners from up Willow Creek have come down. Quinn exchanged a glance with Zara. They'd been hoping for a decent turnout, but this exceeded expectations. The pressure was mounting. And Mr. Prescott? Zara asked, her voice carefully neutral. Front row, center, the mayor confirmed. Along with that reporter from Denver and some fancy folks from Santa Fe. As the time approached to begin, Quinn gathered the musicians for a final word. These men and women, ranchers, shopkeepers, housewives, had worked tirelessly for months, finding time between their regular duties to practice and learn. They looked to him now, nervous but determined. Remember why we started this, he said quietly. Not to impress visitors or prove something to the East. We did this for ourselves, for our town, to bring beauty where others might not expect to find it. He looked at Zara as he spoke the last words, and the understanding that passed between them gave him strength. Whatever happened after tonight, whether she returned to Boston or stayed, this moment was theirs. The concert began shakily, with nervous energy causing the tempo to rush in the Mozart piece. But as they progressed, something remarkable happened. The months of practice, the shared vision, and perhaps the energy of the attentive audience all combined to elevate their performance. By the time they reached the Beethoven, they were playing not just accurately, but with genuine feeling. When Quinn stepped forward for his Vivaldi solo, he found himself looking not at the audience, but at Zara at the piano. The piece they had first connected over now flowed between them like a conversation, his violin singing while her accompaniment provided the perfect foundation. In those moments, the crowded town hall faded away, and they were simply two people speaking the universal language of music. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted in applause. People were standing, some with tears in their eyes. Even the stoic miners from Willow Creek were shouting their approval. Mayor Holloway beamed as if he'd personally taught each musician himself. In the front row, Quinn noticed Quentin Prescott's reaction, surprise, followed by reluctant admiration. The conservatory director caught Zara's eye and offered a small, acknowledging nod. The celebration afterwards spilled into the streets of Colorado Springs. The saloon stayed open late, offering free drinks to orchestra members. The success of the concert created an almost electric atmosphere in town, as if some barrier had been crossed, some new possibility realized. Quinn found Zara standing alone on the boardwalk outside the town hall, looking up at the stars that shone with unmatched brilliance in the clear mountain sky. "You should be celebrating," he said, joining her. "I am," she replied. "Just in my own way." She turned to face him. "Mr. Prescott asked me again to return to Boston. He's offered me a teaching position at the conservatory." Quinn felt his heart sink, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's a remarkable opportunity." "It's what I trained for," she agreed. "What I once wanted more than anything." "And now?" he asked, hardly daring to breathe. Zara was silent for a long moment. "Now I understand something I didn't before. Music isn't just for concert halls and cultured audiences. Tonight, I saw hardened miners moved to tears by Beethoven. I saw children experiencing Symphony Orchestra for the first time. We're building something here, Quinn. Something important." Relief flooded through him. "So you're staying?" "I'm staying," she confirmed. "There's talk of making the orchestra permanent. Monthly concerts, perhaps. Mayor Holloway is already discussing building a proper performance hall." Quinn took a step closer to her. Propriety be damned. "And is that the only reason you're staying?" "The orchestra." In the silvery moonlight, Zara's face softened. "You know it isn't." He reached for her hand then, and she let him take it. "I have nothing to offer you," he said honestly. "A foreman's salary, a small cabin on ranch property." "You have music," she said simply. "An understanding, and a vision for what this place could become." She squeezed his hand. "That's more than most men offer." Under normal circumstances, their courtship would have progressed with appropriate restraint, chaperoned visits, formal calls, gradually increasing signs of affection. But their shared musical journey had accelerated their connection, creating a bond that transcended conventional timelines. Still, Quinn was careful to do things properly. The day after the concert, he called on Zara at her boarding house, formally asking permission to court her. Over the following months, as the orchestra became an established part of Colorado Springs culture, their relationship deepened alongside it. By Christmas of 1885, the First Western Symphony Orchestra had given 3 successful concerts and was preparing a special holiday performance. The town had embraced their musical pioneers, with financial support coming from unexpected quarters, including a substantial donation from the miners of Willow Creek for new instruments. On the night of the Christmas concert, with snow falling gently outside the newly expanded town hall, Quinn led the orchestra through Handel's Messiah with a confidence that would have been unimaginable months earlier. Zara's piano provided the backbone of the performance, her talent finally receiving the recognition it deserved. When the final Amen chord resolved, Quinn turned to the audience and spoke words he'd been rehearsing even more carefully than the music. "Ladies and gentlemen, this orchestra began as a dream shared by myself and Miss Zara Grayson. Through her vision and your support, we've created something unique in the West. But if you'll indulge me, there's one more thing I'd like to create tonight." A murmur of curiosity ran through the audience as Quinn turned to Zara, still seated at the piano, her eyes wide with surprise. "Miss Grayson," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You chose to stay in Colorado Springs when you could have returned to the musical world of the East. You believed in what we could build here." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I'm asking if you'll build something else with me, a life together." The town hall erupted in applause as Quinn dropped to one knee. Zara's hands flew to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Zara Grayson, will you marry me? Her yes was nearly drowned out by the cheers, but Quinn heard it clearly. As he slipped the modest ring onto her finger, a simple band with a small diamond he'd saved 3 months' wages to purchase. The orchestra spontaneously began playing the wedding march, led by a beaming Dr. Matthews on clarinet. They were married in the spring of 1886, with the entire orchestra performing at their wedding. Quinn continued as ranch foreman while developing the Colorado Springs Symphony Orchestra into a respected cultural institution. Zara divided her time between teaching, piano performance, and establishing the territory's first music school. Their marriage merged two seemingly disparate worlds: the rugged practicality of the American West and the refined artistry of classical music, proving that neither needed to exist at the expense of the other. In later years, when orchestras began appearing in Denver, Santa Fe, and other Western cities, music historians would trace their lineage back to that remarkable summer evening in 1885, when a young cowboy with a violin and a schoolteacher with a dream created the first Western Symphony Orchestra, and in doing so, found not just music, but love that would last a lifetime. As Quinn and Zara watched their creation flourish and grow, they often reflected on how their shared passion had brought them together. The beauty they had sought to bring to Colorado Springs had multiplied beyond their imagination. In the orchestra, in their marriage, and in the cultural legacy they built together on the American frontier.